I would like to introduce Mr. David Russell, who's the Chief Technology Officer at LPA Software Solutions. David will be talking to you about analytics modernization. With that, I know Annie's going to pass the ball to him. And maybe, David, you could do a quick, short bio introduction of yourself, and then jump right in. Thank you.
Thanks, Don. So, as Don said, this is David Russell. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at LPA. My background is pretty wide and varied, everything from VR software development 25 years ago through to data warehousing, machine learning, image analysis, a lot of different things that I've done in my career. And my focus these days is certainly on, the IBM suite of tools at LPA, and supporting a number of different, technologies and capabilities that we, support for our clients, and making sure that we understand what's happening in the market, what's happening around the world. And you'll have to excuse my dog because someone is walking across the sidewalk and she does not like that. But regardless, we focus on, a lot of different technologies at IBM around data and management of data. And we're seeing a lot of trends in the industry that I try to focus on about, where are things going, both from a software and from the perspective of where IBM's going with their software, so we can better serve our clients and help them to stay abreast of the situation. So in this case, we're looking at some of the changes that we've been seeing and some of the things that are going on with data and analytics. And, conversation, Chet was talking about, the way they're dealing with movement of data and allowing for reporting and self-service, and that idea of democratization of data analysis. How do you control the data and manage the data for your users so that they get the right answers when they're seeking insights? But also, how do you make that available to them so that they can readily answer the questions that they have? And we're really looking at this from a transition in the way we're dealing with the marketplace and dealing with, even products and services that we're delivering to our clients on a regular basis has been changing over time. And, today, we're really in this, data-centric world where everyone wants to know, what do I know about my customers? What do I know about the marketplace? And what do I know about the world from a data perspective? And we've been sort of moving in this direction for a while. From the movements of products and services. And then, we spent the last decade or so where people have been talking a lot about, customer 360. How do I make sure I know everything about my customer from every angle? And how do I deal with this digital transformation and moving to a world where I'm more prepared for everything from, the digital transformation means different things to different people, but, it does mean, being able to be virtual, being able to have an event like this, being able to, work from home effectively in your environment by being more digital in what you're doing. And a lot of that has prepared us for where we are now. And then where we are is, this focus on taking advantage of the data that we've been collecting over the last 30, 40 years in some cases, but particularly in the last decade, where we've had more of a focus on collection of data and trying to understand our business and operations from all angles in that environment. And so what does it really mean to be data-centric, particularly when you talk about a customer experience, but just in general, it's all about taking advantage of the information that you have and being able to adjust the way you interact with your customers, interact within your organization, and interact with systems based on better knowledge and better insights that you've gained. Again, Chet had an excellent example of, being able to find something that you hadn't really thought about. In the systems, you had a workflow where someone needs to make a note in the system that from a data perspective, should then drive billing ultimately. But then the question of, how do you use data to go find the reality that, that note wasn't even being created, so you didn't even have that driver. And so it's all about being data-centric and finding ways to take advantage of the data that you have. And most studies will talk about the fact that, a lot of the data that's available goes unused. Some studies talk about, specifically, 73% of the data that you create isn't used. Now, this covers everything when we talk about the data that's being unused. This is, data that's being collected by sensors. This is data that's being collected in chats. This is emails. This is, all of that information that becomes difficult to manage frequently. But it really, goes to show that we still have a long way to go when it comes to harnessing the value of the data that we have and taking advantage of what we've collected. And the reality is, we're just getting started with anything. So this is, on average, across large enterprises, we're talking about 797 terabytes of data under management, which is enormous. And I'm sure that some people in the audience are like, I don't have nearly that much data, and that may be true. But the thing that's interesting about that statistic is, for the organizations that we're talking about, that's just data under management. That's data that they actually have some knowledge of, if you will, and that they're controlling and that they're managing, in their organization and dealing with on a regular basis. It's not necessarily accounting for some of that data that they aren't aware of that's in their organization, that is passing through in a more ephemeral, and that they're not making concerted efforts to manage and control. And the reality is, we're just seeing that continue to increase over time. We may have, hundreds of terabytes under management now. We're moving to where we're going to be talking about thousands of terabytes easily, and into petabytes of data that people are needing to manage and needing to understand and try to take advantage of. And with that, right, we have to understand that when we talk about machine learning, predictive analytics, AI, whichever term you want to use for this movement, data is ultimately the fuel for that, right? The whole concept of doing anything with machine learning and AI, deep learning, is to have a volume of data that is clean and represents the real world, if you will, and being able to take that data and analyze it in a fashion that allows you to distill greater insights and to distill information from that can lead to better decisions in the future. We've known that we need to control data, and we've been working for a long time in a lot of different ways to manage that data. And we've been doing this in a lot of different ways. I would say that, we started with this concept of a data warehouse, right? We needed to be able to take data that might be ephemeral data that was passing through the organization, that, may live for a day and represent a snapshot in time, take that and have a place to store it and maintain it and control it, so that we can then take advantage of that and look back, at history and understand how things are moving forward. And having that, organized data warehouse, we focused heavily on being able to organize the data to make it easy to report on the data. Now, making something easy to report on frequently means that you've spent time to organize it a certain way, and that you've spent time to model it, and you've put some effort and thought into how to make it easy to answer the questions that people are going to ask of it. And frequently, those processes that are involved in trying to make it easier to report on data in your data warehouse also starts to create tension in the organization, because frequently that's looked at as slow, right? Because now that you're putting effort into trying to make it easier for people to use, the time and effort that it takes to get it there has created tension, and people get concerned that they're missing out. So now we had the concept of data lakes, and data lakes was sort of the answer to that, which was, okay, I'm going to have an area where I'm just going to bring the data in and treat it as a resource, and it's going to be in its natural state in that lake. I'm not going to have done a lot of refinement and preparation for moving in the data warehouse, and I'm going to make that available to people. And they're going to be able to query this and do analytics and be able to gain better business insight without waiting for what was perceived as that slow process of moving data into the data warehouse. The issue with both of these is that to really take advantage of it, you needed to have some sort of governance process in place. And that governance process, that people implement spans everything from spreadsheets that just have, data definitions and glossaries and give you, pointers to what columns in what database field, whether it be in a data warehouse or it be data living in the data lake, some definition of what's there, where to find it, how to use it, and what the context is that data came from, so that I'm using it correctly. And we apply a bunch of different tools, everything, as I said, spreadsheets are very common. You have, wikis that people start to put up that allows people to share information about what they know. And, even specialized tools for governance and information, tracking, business terms and tracking the data. Those are pretty critical to making these successful in both cases, because without that layer of control and without that information that helps people know how to use things, your data warehouse can turn into a data vault. It's a wonderful organized place where all of your data goes, but getting it back out of that can be difficult. Cognos goes to great lengths to make it easier for people to access that data to try to prevent that problem, the data vault. But even with other tools and other uses for that data in the data warehouse, that governance layer and that layer that makes it accessible, is important to avoid that. And the data lake, you frequently hear the term data swamp. If you lose track of what data you've put into that data lake and what that data means and how you should use it and how you can use it, it just becomes a morass of information or data bits that are stored there, and being able to actually glean true information and make use of it becomes a problem. Even building on that, right? We've also tried things when we talk about cloud environment, because the data volumes and the analysis requirements to deal with the data as we're working to govern it and manage it well in our data warehouses and our data lakes, frequently exceeds what we can manage easily on premise. And so we start to move things to the cloud, and we see people, transitioning to the cloud frequently in a lot of different ways. But frequently you also get to the point where someone recognizes that there's a particular data set or a particular workload that for some reason somebody doesn't want to move it to the cloud. So now you keep maintaining a piece of your systems on premise, and you have to communicate with the cloud. Now, the reality is very few people have a single cloud provider or a single cloud, and so the reality becomes much more complex. You have data and workloads in many different places. They can be on premise, they can be in IBM's cloud, they can be in an OpenStack cloud, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, and other private providers. So you have a lot of different places that you need to manage. You need that scalability that comes with the cloud providers and with the cloud capabilities. You need those different, be able to move those workloads among those different environments. But you run the risk as you move to each of those environments of having a different deployment environment, a different way of managing your environment and your data. And that can create headaches for your system administration process, as well as just from a development and integration process, that if you're running different tools in each of these clouds on different platforms and in different environments, that really can create a headache for you. But we do need to understand that the hybrid and multi-cloud environment that this creates for you is something that's going to be a reality for most of us, that we're going to find needs for software and services that are provided in different places and in different organizations, and we want to take advantage of price advantages across cloud vendors and things like that. So there's a lot to be said for some of that flexibility, but you need to be able to manage that and to be able to manage across that environment. So when we really talk about modernization, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be throwing out techniques of the past and replacing them in wholesale. Data warehouses and data lakes are likely to continue to be part of your broader solution. We're going to need to focus on tools that make systems easier to govern and manage, while still meeting the needs of our data analysts with whatever tools that they're needing to use. When we talk about modernization, we're talking about a number of different areas of modernization. We can talk about applications and computing modernization, the idea of write once, run anywhere, microservices and containerization. You may hear those terms as sort of the next step beyond virtualization, but going to containerization. On the data and analytics side, you'll hear things about having, wanting simple and capable data tools, right? That's one of the things that we see, certainly as Cognos providers, we see this idea that the marketplace has developed that Cognos is not simple and isn't capable of certain things. And, I think that's nonsense. As we all know, when we do use Cognos, it has more capabilities than most can take advantage of. But we need those simple tools to do data analysis. We need to have data discovery at enterprise scale. That means being able to find the data that you have wherever it lives, and ideally being able to find it without necessarily needing to move the data into a specific data lake or a specific data warehouse. You want to make sure that when you do that, when you make it available or make data available to users, whether it be a data lake, a data warehouse, or directly from operational databases, that you have that in a governed and secure fashion. You need to be able to deal with issues about PII and other issues with data so that people that aren't supposed to be able to see certain pieces of information can still have access to information that can be valuable to them that isn't necessarily tied to individual data. You need to have data and analytics tools that can run anywhere, and that they're the same tools wherever you run them. And you want to be able to connect data wherever it lives, whether it be in the cloud or whether it be on premise. And then on the AI and machine learning front, we need to be thinking about transparency, training, and making sure that we keep in mind augmented intelligence rather than necessarily focusing on pure artificial intelligence. And what I mean by that is the idea of using tools like Watson Assistant and others to augment the intelligence of our workers and being able to provide them with data that they need when they need it, and using AI to support them rather than to supplant them necessarily. On the training side, you need to be able to train people to understand where AI and machine learning make sense and when to question those systems rather than simply taking the results that they produce as the final word, and helping them to acknowledge and know how they can deal with that correctly. On the transparency side, we need to be focused on how do we make sure that we know what a machine learning model is doing, right? So when Chet's team is developing these new models, being able to make sure that we can help them to understand how those decisions are being made so that people will trust the model instead of questioning the results. And that transparency piece is an important part as we continue to move forward. So, open for questions at this point. I've sort of stayed away from specific IBM tools and things. Part of this conversation, particularly for Cognos users, you're going to be hearing moving forward. If you haven't already heard of it, with Cloud Pak for Data and the integration of Cognos into Cloud Pak for Data. Cloud Pak for Data is really intended to tackle a lot of these problems that I've specifically identified. And so as you're thinking about, as you're trying to understand what people are talking about when they talk about, the ability to deploy Cognos as part of a Cloud Pak for Data instance, the whole platform is designed around answering these questions that I've talked about and assisting with everything from governance through data analysis, through, even a Cognos deployment environment in these multi-cloud and hybrid cloud situations. So, Don, were there any questions that came up?
Yeah. So, David, one question. I mean, you had the chart there that showed all the different multiple clouds: the IBM cloud, Azure, AWS. Why did you kind of made an assumptive statement that you're going to need multiple clouds? Can't you just pick one cloud and go with it?
Well, yes, I do sort of assume that you're going to end up on more than one cloud. And I think that that's sort of a general assumption in the marketplace because that's the way things tend to be going. And that tends to be what we see. For a lot of, organizations, you're going to choose one and you're going to start there. But what you may find is that, there are a lot of different reasons why you might move between different clouds. Some of that may be that you choose a service, or you have a group within your organization that chooses a service that specializes in running in a particular cloud. And so you may end up there. You may also find that, in a large enough organization, you're going to be in a situation where you've got workloads that have moved into different clouds and you have contractual reasons that you end up in multiple clouds, and you still need to manage that environment. But I would recommend to someone who is trying to move to the cloud in general to choose one and try to specialize on that. But you also have to think about what might you want to do to not be locked in to a particular cloud provider, such that you do have freedom. If for whatever reason you can't continue with a particular cloud provider, whether that's because of pricing differences that makes it, financially advantageous to move, what's it going to take to move your workloads from one cloud provider to another, as well as situations where a cloud provider may go out of business or decide to move, to refuse to host your services. You may need to think about how you can be a multi-cloud user rather than a single cloud. Does that help, Don?
Yeah, I think that gets at it. And so the other terms that you had in your chart there, containers and microservices, if I'm not using them today and I'm getting the job done, do I really, you're kind of saying I'm going to need those going forward in the future. Why is that?
Yeah, well, I think that we're still at a point where a lot of end users of applications aren't going to be necessarily impacted by that directly. It's a deeper software development paradigm, if you will. So when you think about, cloud native application development, that's where the developers are moving, right? And that's where applications are moving. And it's certainly where IBM is moving with a lot of their development for cloud native applications, is moving towards containers and microservices. It provides better utilization of hardware and provides better failover, and a lot of the things that you've had to work hard at in the past to deal with disaster recovery and self-healing of applications are things that those capabilities really help to provide. So, at an end user level, at a high-end application level, you probably don't need to worry about it too much, but you should be aware of it, that it's something people are going to be talking about for the next 5-10 years as we move more into, cloud native type development, both on-premise and off-premise.
We're not going to be able to get away from it. It's inevitable.
No,
starting to think about it now is important.
Absolutely. And at least being aware of it and knowing what it means and what it doesn't mean is helpful, right?
Gotcha. One last. It's kind of an interesting way of wording it, but are we really at the point that we have all the right tools to make data and analytics simple and easy, or are we just fighting a losing battle when trying to manage the vast amounts of data being collected? I mean, that chart you showed on how much data we're getting, it seems daunting.
Sure. And I think that, we certainly have a lot of great tools that simplify the process of making use of the data. I think we've still got a lot that we're going to need to do. I think that there's still a lot that we're going to have to do in order to be able to manage the volumes of data. And really, part of that is, deciding which data is important, right? One of the things that I think we deal with when we start talking about those huge numbers is that there's a reality that we have huge volumes of data being generated, but which pieces of that data are really necessary and really provide greater insights for us. And I think that's where the tools are, really headed, is helping us be able to mark the data and recognize the data that's useful versus the data that really should be ephemeral, right? And helping us to make some of those decisions so that we can, one, handle the volumes. We certainly have tools that can handle the volumes of data that are out there. Making it simple and easy to use, we've absolutely got, it's easier today, no doubt, to take advantage of things. Chet even pointed out, had the data available, needed to make a few tweaks, was able to generate something that they never even thought about in less than a week, right? And that's the kind of thing that we want to get to, and that we certainly have the ability to get to today. Are we fighting a losing battle against the data? Probably not. But it's still something that we have to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I mean, when I think of that kind of question in context, you always go back to whatever that famous Bill Gates, comment was about, 128, the processing power is going to be more than enough we need for, the decade. And, a year later is irrelevant. These things, technology and data, it's always going to grow, but so will the corresponding, technologies to handle it. So I'm comfortable that we're going to be able to handle it. And I do appreciate the presentation there, David, you did, and you avoided any specific products. You talked about what's going on. Clearly, for anybody who's listening, IBM's Cloud Pak for Data platform solves a lot of the questions David brought up in his presentation. So I'm assuming many of you have heard of Cloud Pak for Data. If you haven't, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to set up some time. David meets weekly with different customers, talking to them about how it could apply in their environment. So we've got a chart here that, the ways David could help. And David, maybe you can comment on this real quickly. I see one more question came in while you comment on this. I'll look at the question. Oh, we put you on mute. Never mind, David. We'll send these charts out afterwards, but again, the ability to look at these trends and say, what do they mean to your organization and what steps should you be taking? We can help with creating a visioning workshop, maybe spend 2 to 4 hours to brainstorm those topics with some of your key folks. As I did the introduction slides of LPA, we have a more formal consulting engagement about creating a whole strategy and roadmap. And obviously, we can introduce you to the very specific pieces of the IBM software platform. And the last bullet is pretty exciting, where Forrester, rates IBM the best in that predictive analytics and machine learning category. So anyway, with that, maybe, Annie, we could pass the ball to Liz Herrera.